4 buy lows, 4 sell highs, all before week 7. And Ty, we got some doozies on this one today, and I'm going to switch it up on the people. We're not going to start with running backs today. We're not going to start with you. I'm just going to take the reins. I'm just going to take the reins right now and start with my first pass catcher because I'm so stinking excited about what I think is going to happen with Xavier Worthy over the rest of the season. And now I know what you might be thinking. Cameron, that's disgusting. You're really going to try to have me buy in on a guy who has yet to have more than 50 receiving yards in a game, yet to have more than 3 receptions in a game, that is getting outproduced by Juju Smith-Schuster? And my answer is yes. Go buy in on Xavier Worthy right now because he is being efficient when the targets come. He's 6th in fantasy points per target right now. So when the ball's thrown to him, when he's handed the ball, he does really well with it. I mean, you just look at his carries right now. He's got 6 carries on the season, and has 2 touchdowns with those 6 carries. But the reason I really like Xavier Worthy, he's coming off of the bye week. And what does that mean? Well, that means that Andy Reid had some time to work some magic, just like he did last year with Rashee Rice. And I know he's not Rashee Rice, but Rashee Rice before the bye last year, 4.5 targets a game, 3.7 receptions, 42 yards, and have a touchdown for 10.4 fantasy points per game. After the bye, 8.8 targets, 6.8 receptions, 80 yards, 0.4 touchdowns, and 17 points per game. Scoring 7 points per game, more went from the wide receiver 39 to the wide receiver 9 after the bye. I'm not saying that Xavier Worthy takes the same jump, but he's the wide receiver 1 in this wide receiver. Oh, maybe you give it to Juju as of right now, but talent-wise, he's the wide receiver 1. And I got to think that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes used this bye week to really get him integrated into this offense and really get him comfortable with what they're trying to do.
Yeah, we have seen it sporadically, Xavier Worthy being utilized downfield. And again, to your point, coming off the bye, you hope that there was something kind of drawn up over the bye week for Xavier Worthy. I think the other thing is, too, the price is low enough where the reward is so substantial that it's like, even if it doesn't pan out, you're not going to lose a whole lot by investing in Xavier Worthy on your fantasy team. So not to say that you have no reason to not at least go send some feelers out to your league mates. But at the same time, it's again, the ceiling is still there the rest of the season for the guy. So it is at least worth looking into.
Yeah, some players that are in the range of Xavier Worthy right now. I'm looking at Fantasy Pros rest of season rankings. They have Jacoby Myers, Christian Watson, Ladd McConkey, Khalil Shakir, all right around him. All of those guys are guys I would gladly go sell to get Xavier Worthy. If you've got a running back right now, a Chase Brown, someone like that, maybe you trade him for Xavier Worthy, your running back needy team. I just think the upside is so great for Worthy. I think he's a perfect piece if you are that 6-0 team, 5-1, even 4-2 right now, and can afford to just have a guy on your bench because if he pops, you want him in your lineup moving forward. But Ty, we're going to talk about the original Xavier Worthy. So why don't you take it away on Tyreek Hill?
Yeah, Tyreek Hill is a buy, and you should go try to buy him right now. I think a lot of people may hear that and be like, really? Am I really going to be able to get Tyreek Hill? As I said right at the top, not guys that you're not gonna be able to buy low on Tyreek Hill ever. Okay. But all I'm saying is, even if it's 95 cents on the dollar, go get Tyreek Hill, because the biggest reason for Tyreek Hill's poor performances over the last couple of weeks has just been because he doesn't have Tua. It was reported that Tua has been getting the confirmation that he's been looking for, you could say, to get back on the field once he's off the IR. So if Tua comes back, I mean, what is there not to, expect with Tyreek Hill? We can put Tyreek Hill back to that top 5, top 3 wide receiver status. So there's really no statistical argument that I can give you here after the last couple of weeks with Tyreek Hill. But look, with Tua coming back, trade Stephon Diggs because you got Nico Collins coming back off of the IR. Trade Stephon Diggs for Tyreek Hill. Trade Deebo Samuel plus. You're going to have to package Deebo, but still, if you can trade a big name receiver or at least a well-known receiver in a package for Tyreek Hill, you should absolutely do so because this guy can legitimately win you a league.
100%. And if you're thinking about the Tyreek Hill manager, more than likely they're hurting. I gotta think there are very few people who drafted Tyreek Hill that are sitting at 4-2, 5-1, 6-0. If you are, let us know in the comments because I want to congratulate you. That means you drafted well the rest of your draft. But I gotta imagine if your first round pick, right, your second or third overall pick is down as bad as Tyreek Hill has been, your team's probably pretty down bad right now. So like you said, give him a player who's producing right now. Diggs is a perfect example. Maybe you got to go Diggs in a little bit extra. Throw in, one of those later round running. I brought up Chase Brown earlier. He might be a decent player to throw in with Diggs to go get Tyreek Hill because we know what Tyreek Hill is when he's on. We know what he's like when Tua's back. He's 20 fantasy points a game, and that's pretty unreplaceable as of right now. And I'm going to transition to his teammate, actually, Achane, because I think people are getting more worried about Achane because the last 3 games have just been hard to watch. 7.3 points per game, 7.3 points, 4.4, and 2.2 points over the last 3 weeks. Obviously, in the last one, he was knocked out with a concussion, but I think that just furthers the worry on Achane because, oh, look, he's already been injured once again. What's been disappointing for Achane is he's only seen 11, 10, and 3 carries, but he's also only seen 3, 3, and 1 receptions over those last 3 weeks. I got to imagine coming off the bye, the game plan has to be, we have 3 of the fastest players in the entire NFL. We need to get them the ball in space. And what better way to do that than to start increasing Achane's receiving work again? I view Achane as a top 7 running back rest of the season, borderline top 5. And I look on Fantasy Pros right now, they got him as the running back 13 rest of the season. So there are a lot of people who are worried about Achane. They're not just worried, oh no, Tua's not playing well. They're worried, I don't know if they know how to use him. I don't know if this magic we saw last year is going to come back. Yards per attempt this season so far, 2.4, 4.4, 2.7, 1.5 in his 4 healthy games. I get it. It hasn't been magical like it has last season, but we saw in those first 2 games what it can look like when they truly utilize Achane's 7 targets and 7 receptions in each game. I think that's going to return after the bye.
It absolutely should. And I think a lot of people have had their expectations changed a bit over the last couple of weeks, not just because of the Tua injury, but because of the Raheem Mostert injury, where you're seeing back to week 2, he had 22 carries, 7 catches. So everyone's like, oh, we finally got the monster game from Achane. That's not going to happen again. If you're expecting, or I should say what you should expect from Achane is what you saw in week 1. 10 carries, a touchdown, 7 catches, 70 yards. The yards are going to fluctuate, but he's going to stick in that 15 to 18 touch range. He is not going to be a workhorse back. He's not going to be most utilized on the ground. He may finish with more carries and receptions in games, but his biggest threat, his biggest skill set is in the receiving game. So understand that the last 4 weeks for this, I'll just speak generally, for this Dolphins offense have been off for various reasons. It's all going to get back to I'll say their bread and butter. When Tua comes back, Tyreek, Waddle, and now Achane too. We're going to get these big performances from these Dolphins players again. So if anything, go buy Waddle too. Go invest in these Dolphins players because once it's all back to normal, good things are going to happen.
And I know the other concern might be Mostert's going to be back now. Jalen Wright's looking good. Achane does better in the Jahmyr Gibbs role, where he doesn't have to be the primary ground and pound back, where he can be the guy where you're using him in space, where, all of a sudden he'll surprise you up through the tackles. That's what he thrived in last season. That's what I think they're going to be able to get back to this year. And, it could be week 8 is probably the earliest we could see Tua, might be even later in the season. but you just kind of got to weather the storm. And I think Achane out of the three has the most likely, is more likely than the other two to kind of rebound before Tua gets back, just being the running back compared to the wide receivers. All right, Ty, we're moving away from kind of these star-studded names with Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, and you're kind of, I don't want to call him a boring trade target, but at the same time, right, he just doesn't have the same name, same sex appeal, if you will, as these other two. But I think nonetheless, this is a guy that you should be targeting in your leagues.
Yeah, Brian Robinson, being on the Commanders, you don't think of that being a trade target or someone to go buy right now in your fantasy leagues. And obviously the knee injury that he's been dealing with over the last week, it just adds some more skepticism, I'll call it, for the near future. But there are just not many running backs that you can buy at this point in the season on high scoring offenses that are pretty much locked into, I shouldn't say locked into production, but the fact that the guy was getting somewhere between 16 to 21 carries a game before getting hurt, where else are you going to get that with a bit of a dip in his value right now because of the injury, right? So, of course, there's always some risk with buying players when they're, currently injured and going to recover and stuff like that. But in some weird way, the longer that he's out just means that the price will continue to go down. So, yeah, the risk also goes up, but it's kind of a cost benefit analysis of just like, the risk goes up, but the price goes lower. So it kind of cancels out and you're like, you know what? It's worth taking a shot. And again, as long as this offense continues to put up points, Brian Robinson's going to continue doing so as well in fantasy. He's got 4 out of 5 games this year with at least 13.8 fantasy points. The dude has been one of the most steady fantasy producers this year at the running back position. Now, if he does return this week, he probably isn't going to get the normal workload that we have been seeing, but he gets Carolina. So you could benefit from an insanely efficient day on the ground. And then after that, might be back to the normal workload. And he gets nice matchups too with Chicago and the Giants, Eagles, and the Cowboys. They're leaking yards to running backs, or they are giving up high yards per carry as well. Again, there are not many running backs to go buy right now in this market. Brian Robinson might be one of the only ones. And yes, there is risk involved because of the injury, but the price may make it worthwhile.
And he's a red zone threat. And like you said, this Commanders offense looks good. They're one of the better offenses in the NFL right now. And Cliff Kingsbury is stuck true to who he is. And that is, if we're inside the 10-yard line, I run the ball. And I'll just keep running the ball to get in the end zone. Brian Robinson right now has the second most attempts inside the 10-yard line per game out of any running back in the NFL with 2.6. He has 13 on the season, and he has 5 touchdowns on those 13 attempts. So the touchdown worries, he's touchdown dependent. He's a guy who's going to find the end zone consistently. If you remember James Conner, we said that about James Conner 2 seasons in a row. He put up 18 and 12 in 2 seasons in a row. We were like, that can't happen again. But in this Cliff Kingsbury offense, that's how he uses his running backs. And like you said, Ty, he is the true buy low right now because he's not a pretty name coming off the injury. And you know that there is risk. You can't have a buy low without there being risk. Otherwise, there would be no reason that people would be selling low on him. But with that, we will take a quick break and hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and Lucas would be so unbelievably disappointed with me right now because I've waited till over halfway through the episode and I haven't spoken to the 93% yet. The 93% of you who are just freeloading on our content without subscribing. The 93% of you who, you know what? Most of you are coming back to watch more videos. We see the analytics. We see that over half our views per episode are returning viewers. And yet you're not subscribing. I mean, what is it? What do we have to do better? What don't you like about? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to beg for your subscribe, but just turn that mouse a little bit, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications. If you're on the audio podcast, we thank you again for listening and your loyal support over there. But I won't keep people waiting anymore, Ty, because they want to hear about your running back sell. Who is it this week?
It's Josh Jacobs. We talked about Jacobs a little bit on yesterday's episode, whether we are expecting his performances to continue, if we expect them to bounce back a little bit. I think we are all kind of torn. We all kind of are siding with the trending side of this 15, 16, 17 yard carries per game, but only mustering like 60, 70 yards on it, not enough receiving work, and the touchdowns aren't there, right? So while the volume intrigue is still there, while the name appeal is still there for Josh Jacobs, I'm saying to sell him. He's not scoring despite being top 10 in carries inside the 10. The guy's getting opportunities and they're not coming through. The upcoming schedule isn't exactly the easiest, isn't exactly, the most running back friendly matchups. That's not to say that he can't produce in them. They don't exactly instill confidence, I think is the best way to say it. 6 of the last 9 opponents for the Packers are in the bottom half of rushing yards allowed per game, and 4 of those 6 are bottom 12 in yards per carry. So you're taking a guy that already isn't efficient, that isn't capitalizing on his scoring opportunities, and the rest of the way for the season, more times than not, he's probably going up against a tougher matchup or a tougher run defense. Again, with the name appeal, with the volume intrigue that is still there for Josh Jacobs, I think flipping Josh Jacobs, dare I say, not to exactly copy one of my buys, but package Josh Jacobs to go get Tyreek Hill, right? Like that's, to me, find the manager that's reeling right now, that needs kind of a steady Eddie in terms of production or volume, and go try to buy one of their better players, because Josh Jacobs will give them exactly that, but you're also getting the better upside in the player you're getting in return.
So I will admit, we talked about it, like you said, a little bit last episode. I'm a little more optimistic than you and Lucas for Josh Jacobs. And I think the touchdowns are going to come. But the issue for Jacobs right now are the receptions, the targets going to start becoming more consistent, because we've seen him go 3 targets, 0 targets, 1 target. Obviously, both those games with Malik Willis, but then 6 targets, 1 target, 3 targets. If he can be consistently getting 3 or 4 receptions a game, I think you have a very good floor for Josh Jacobs. The issue lies in, is that something that we're going to see consistently, or is that just going to be in every other game? You have to kind of guess. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, that's where you get a little bit worried about Jacobs. So I agree. I think he's got the upside, but the inefficiency is going to continue to hold him back. That was what we talked about in the offseason of his one season where he had 1,600 yards. That was the anomaly for Josh Jacobs. The average for Josh Jacobs is 4 yards per carry and a little bit below. That's his career average, and that's kind of what we're seeing again this year. So I don't hate it that you're saying Josh Jacobs is a sell. I think he's more of a hold personally, but I do understand going, I just don't want to deal with a guy who needs a touchdown to be productive, and we just haven't seen the touchdowns. Whereas Brian Robinson's a guy similar to Josh Jacobs. Oh, I need a touchdown, but he's getting fed the ball consistently inside the 5, and he's the way that they score touchdowns when he's on the field.
So I see Jacobs as a guy to upgrade from regardless of position. So again, I mentioned Tyreek Hill. Could you could try to go do Josh Jacobs for like a Kyron Williams, somebody like that. I think that's who Jacobs is at this point, at least in trade markets. That being said, though, completely get holding him, because the other part of this is, again, he's been getting opportunities inside the 10 and they haven't exactly come through just yet. But again, let's say, because he's, 9 carries inside the 10? Was it the stat from yesterday? 1 for 9, essentially. Let's say that gets closer to like 25-30%. Josh Jacobs is immediately a top 10 running back then. So that's kind of the game that you're playing with Jacobs of, okay, if I'm going to sell, can I bring in a guy with higher upside than Jacobs currently gives me? Because I think that is what you can sell people on with Jacobs.
Yeah, I do think the consistency is a factor. My sell is a guy that just emerged, and I just don't know how long it's going to stay, and it's Bucky Irving. He is, looked really good against the Saints. He was, if you were cheering for Bucky Irving to take over, this is what you wanted to see. Rachaad White's out, so Bucky Irving comes in, puts up 80 yards rush, or 18 fantasy points, has a good day on the ground, right? He has 2 receptions through the air, 14 carries, 81 yards, and a tutty. So this is what you wanted to see from Bucky Irving. The thing that worries me now, though, is we might have somewhat of a 3-headed backfield in Tampa Bay with Sean Tucker's emergence. Do I think all of a sudden Sean Tucker is going to be sitting here taking 50% of carries? No. But if the hope was, hey, now Bucky's the 1A, Rashad hopefully is the 1B, and they're splitting 40-40, and you got now Sean Tucker coming in taking 20% of the snaps, it's just taking more and more volume away from Bucky Irving, where I think people are excited now. They're like, hey, this is the guy. He's going to be a consistent starter. Or I'm just like, I think this is as good as it gets for Bucky Irving. I think this 18 points, looking like he's going to be the starter, is as good as it gets. And I'm not even fully convinced that the Tampa Bay is going to let him be the 1A over Rachaad White. Rachaad White still might see more snaps throughout the week, depending on how they feel about these 2 in pass protection. And then, like we talked about, Todd Bowles comes right out, says, hey, this guy earned snaps, Sean Tucker. It's just a little worrisome. Then their upcoming schedule too: Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City. Baltimore and Kansas City for sure. You're not running the ball all game. You got to put up some points, especially Baltimore. Got to put up some points. They're one of the best run defenses in the NFL. And my other worry is too, if there is going to be a receiving back in this backfield, I don't think it's Bucky Irving. I think it's going to be Rachaad White. I think Sean Tucker showed that, hey, he could, get some of that work as well. So that is one of my worries. But he's the guy I would look to sell to the Rachaad White manager, the Zach Moss manager, the Devin Singletary manager, right? Guys who were these are starting to lose their jobs at the running back position. Travis Etienne manager right now. I'm not selling for those guys, but I'm selling to that manager saying, hey, here's your cheap replacement. Maybe I can get a JSN type player, right? A wide receiver that I know has pretty decent upside, but it isn't super highly valued at this time. Tank Dell would be another one. And, I understand too with Bucky, it might not just be Bucky for these guys straight up, but you're building a package for those. Josh Downs, even, I don't mind going after. Xavier Worthy would be a guy I'd go get for Bucky Irving. So I would go look to get a wide receiver from one of these running back needy teams.
Yeah, another running back to also kind of throw into that Devin Singletary and Zach Moss list, the Jerome Ford manager, right? With Nick Chubb coming back, go target those guys. Go target the manager. Maybe it isn't those managers specifically, but if you know somebody that wants a running back, needs a running back, that's the one to target. And it's not so much us being pessimistic on the talent of Bucky Irving, because we all would agree that Bucky Irving is has been the most productive, efficient running back in Tampa so far this year. It's us just saying too many question marks, too many red flags with the Sean Tucker stuff. Rachaad White will still be there. I shouldn't say still be there. He will still be around. he is still going to be kind of, maybe by snap counts, he's probably going to be 1A to Bucky 1B in terms of snaps again, just to clarify. Bucky is, we also talked about Bucky on the last episode too, of just like, this one will stink to sell because you're like, gosh, I got him really cheap. And he's been coming through. I'm not sure I want to get rid of that. This is how you do just kind of have to like work the phones and just kind of channel your inner mogul a little bit, because you can upgrade now from where, it's what, oh gosh, too many thoughts at once. All I'm saying, you can get substantially more now for Bucky than you could have at the beginning of the year.
No,
that should give you an idea of what you should do.
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying. You're selling high, and I think this is the highest point that he gets to. Before we get to our pass catchers, I want your 30-second thoughts, because we had two big trades in the NFL today. Davante Adams going to the Jets, Amari Cooper going to the Bills. Just 30 seconds, maybe 15, 20 seconds on each. What are your thoughts, instant fantasy thoughts for those trades?
I'll start with the Amari Cooper to the Bills one. I like the move for everyone involved, just because I think attention gets pulled off of Kincaid. Khalil Shakir kind of stepped up in terms of the, we need somebody to kind of be Josh Allen's go-to guy. It probably hurts Khalil Shakir the most, but I like the move for everyone else. It helps James Cook, helps the running game. For Davante going to the Jets, I'm not exactly sure how much better it'll get. It'll get better. I'm just not sure if it's substantially better, because you still have an offensive system in place from Nathaniel Hackett and Todd Downing. Yeah. So it's not that it cancels out. You're adding one of the best wide receivers in the game to your offense. Like, it's going to help out a little bit. So I like both moves for both teams. I get why both teams made the moves that I did, but if I had to say like what move I like better than the other, I like Amari Cooper to the Bills more than Davante to the Jets.
Yeah. Well, especially from a fantasy perspective, right? The Bills wide receivers, you weren't expecting any of them to be wide receiver ones. Like you said, it helps Kincaid, helps Josh Allen. It's going to help the run game. In New York, does this hurt Brees? Does this hurt? It's got to hurt Garrett Allen for sure. Like, at least the ceiling wise, it's got to hurt Garrett Allen. Or not Garrett Wilson. What am I saying? Garrett Allen? Where am I coming up with this crap? But it for sure hurts Garrett Wilson. And I mean, it helps Aaron Rodgers, but you're not starting him for fantasy football anyways. But we'll keep it moving with our last two sells. Tyler, you got your wide receiver sell. It makes me a little bit sad that you're saying his name, because he's been fun to watch, but I do get it. So who is your wide receiver sell?
Jameson Williams. Let's call a spade here. JMO has gotten bailed out by 2 plays in his last 3 games. He had a 70-yard touchdown in week 4, and he had a 37-yard touchdown in week 6. In the span of the last 3 games, he's been the wide receiver 83 in usage. And I repeat, the wide receiver 83. He is 5th in fantasy points over expected. And his dip in volume is a direct result of the Lions offense leaning on the run as much as they are right now. Back in week 3, they had 43 team rushing attempts to just 23 passing attempts. They had 28 team rushing attempts to 18 in week 4. In this past week, in week 6, they had 36 team rushing attempts to 27 passing attempts. And Goff hasn't topped 29 dropbacks in that stretch as well. So with how well they're running the ball, with how much they are relying on the run game right now, the Lions don't need Jameson Williams to have the weeks like he did in week 1 and week 2, where he's putting up double-digit targets or over 100 yards and finding the end zone. It stinks. You're losing some insane week-to-week upside, because, again, we've seen the past 2 weeks, but in week 4 and week 6, if he scores a big one, he was a great start. I'm just saying the volume's no longer there. He is now an extremely risky boom bust play each week. that what we saw in weeks 1 and 2, we are probably not going to see for the rest of the year.
Yeah, it's a bummer because you got excited in weeks 1 and 2. You're like, oh, Jamo's arrived, and he comes back seeing 1, 2, and 3 targets in his last 3 games. He gets Minnesota, Tennessee, Green Bay, Houston in his next couple of games. Jacksonville, Indy, you're kind of excited about, but then he finishes with Chicago, Green Bay, Buffalo, Chicago, San Francisco. Those are a bunch of teams that aren't going to really are going to do everything they can to keep the ball in front of them, to not allow Jameson Williams to break the big one. He feels again like he's being relegated again to a shiny Alec Pierce, where if he hits the big one, you're really happy. If he doesn't, you're sitting there with, like you were in that Arizona game, with 3 targets, 1 reception, and 9 yards. That is the issue. That is the worry with Jameson Williams. So yeah, I agree. He's got to be a sell just based off of usage we've seen over the last couple of weeks. A guy that you were hoping usage would be pretty good for as my last sell is Michael Pittman Jr. And you know what? He's finally starting to score some touchdowns, Ty. He's had touchdowns in back-to-back games. My only issue is he's only had 1 season in his career with more than 4 touchdowns. So I don't think this is something that is going to be sticky. I don't think this is something that's going to continue. He's also only had 1 game this season over 40 receiving yards. I thought that was insane. That he could, be putting up decent weeks, week after week, but he hasn't had any more than 40 receiving yards. And where is he? He's wide receiver 33 as of right now. So it's kind of gross, but you've gotten 121 yards and then touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. So this would be the time to sell on him. Josh Downs has out-targeted Michael Pittman in each of the last 3 weeks. And now you got Anthony Richardson coming back, which means that passing pie gets smaller again. And you got Jonathan Taylor coming back, which means we're not going to have Trey Sermon get 15 carries for 7 yards or whatever it was again on Sunday. We're actually going to get a competent running back in that backfield. The running game is going to be reestablished. So I just think this is the best it gets for Michael Pittman. Move off of him. Just don't have him be your headache rest of the season.
Yeah, this one feels a little bit of a victory lap for you because you've been the most out on Michael Pittman this year. That being said, though, we also need to remember that his touchdown against Tennessee this past Sunday is, I'm not going to say the most fluky touchdown, but if Joe Flacco is going to throw just a F it, somebody is down there somewhere kind of ball off his back foot, it just so happened to be a score to Michael Pittman Jr. So I thought about getting bold for a second and being like, if there's a Colts receiver you want, it's Josh Downs. I'm not going there, but the team is definitely putting Josh Downs in more situations to be fantasy relevant than Michael Pittman right now.
Yeah, it's interesting just thinking, golly, could Josh Downs really outproduce Michael Pittman at this point? And targets say there is the potential, and the fact that Pittman's still seeing targets and not seeing over 40 receiving yards in a game is just disgusting. That's what hurts. Is it's just nothing downfield. His yards per reception so far this season, 7.8, 7, 9, 18.8, 7.4, and 11.7. Absolutely disgusting. Well, with that wraps up our trade targets before week 7, 4 buys, 4 sells. We hope that we are putting you on that track to not only make the playoffs, but go win that championship. Ty and I will be back again tomorrow. Lucas is out for the rest of the week, so he will not join us, but we will have 16 starts and sits for you guys. But don't forget to follow us on the socials. I'm at CamelFFF on the X, at Tyler_Plath for Tyler. You can follow us on Twitter at FFellas, on Instagram, the FFellas, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok, Fantasy Football Fellas. And then if you want our short form on YouTube, Fantasy Football Fellow Shorts. So make sure to follow those. Make sure to subscribe to this channel. Turn on those notifications so you don't miss any single thing. But we will see you tomorrow. Deuces.